If you could keep on, because the force has got a lot of power and it makes me feel like it makes me feel like
Just For social media users joining us online and in the audience, please follow us at Nat Urban League on all platforms and take a moment to update your Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter status using the hashtag NULCONF23. For social media users joining us online and in the audience, please follow us at Nat Urban League on all platforms and take a moment to update your Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter status using the hashtag NULCONF23. Welcome to the National Urban League Plenary 2, State of Black America. Welcome to the stage, Mark H. Moriel, President of the National Urban League.
Good morning, Urban Leaguers. How you feeling this morning? Did everybody make the midnight curfew? All those who didn't make the midnight curfew, please come and stand over here. Give yourselves a warm round of applause. Thank you all for being here. Let me encourage you all, if you want to move up, there's plenty of free and open seats here in the front. Come on up, guys. It's great for you to come on up front. Let's fill up the front this morning. How many of you were at the House of Blues last night? Tell the truth. Who was at the House of Blues last night? It was a good time, and I did get out there. I got out before midnight, so I met the curfew that I set for everyone else. Thank you. Let's let everyone get seated, and then we'll begin, because we have a power-packed morning. Some incredible speakers, a very important continuation of our discussion. And so thank you. So first of all, good morning. Welcome, one and all, to the National Urban League's Plenary number 2. It's the State of Black America, and we are excited that you're with us this morning, and you're in for a treat, as you'll have the opportunity to hear from outstanding leaders this morning. I am grateful that we are able to be in one another's presence again. As we think about the state of Black America, we are also thinking about the state of the nation. And we all know we make progress and there's setbacks. And there'll always be setbacks, but we will not be discouraged, because we've come to Houston to re-energize our minds, our souls, our thought processes, and to build the power and the fortitude to go back to our local communities and continue the work and continue the fight. Let's not forget that we stand on the gains and the shoulders and the hard work of many others. And we continue to see that as inspiration and as momentum to propel us forward, keep us hopeful, and continue to keep us energized as we work towards change. Let us continue to build on the legacies of those who came before us, and be unafraid to take up the challenge to continuously work for an improved state of Black America and an improved state of this nation. This morning, we have a lineup that will inspire us to keep up the good fight in our communities, our country, and the world at large. So, let's get started. At this time, one of our supporters, partners and sponsors, staunch supporters, partners and sponsors, please greet the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for Nationwide and a National Urban League trustee, Vanita Clements.
Sometimes we lose, sometimes we win. Sometimes we try to fit it all in. Sometimes we don't know what's in store. Sometimes we find what we're looking for. Sometimes we're rolling easy and free. Sometimes 1 and 1 makes 3. So much to love along this ride. That's why Nationwide is on your side.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I am so honored to be here for this wonderful conversation. It's invigorating to talk about the state of Black America. I believe that conversations like this lead to powerful moments that matter, and it also gives us a chance to understand what more is needed to foster and create positive change in our communities. As mayors and esteemed leaders, you understand that importance, and we are passionate about the contributions that we all make in this area to make our country, our world a better place, community by community. So on behalf of Nationwide, we want to thank Mark Morial, the Board of Trustees, our affiliates, supporters, and partners for everything that you do, seen and unseen. We appreciate it, and we want you to remember, Nationwide is on your side.
Thank you, Benita and Nationwide, for your support of NUL. It gives me great honor to introduce you to our Chief Volunteer Officer. That's the Chairman of the National Urban League Board of Trustees. Please applaud and give a real welcome to Tim Murphy.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mark, for that incredibly gracious introduction. It's a real honor to be with you all again and to share another day of conversation and of insight. And as we kick off day 2, I want to thank the Urban League staff for its incredible work planning this conference, an amazing day yesterday. And I also want to thank again the Houston Urban League and President Judson Robinson III for hosting us in this very beautiful city. We come together this year at a moment filled with celebration and with real urgency, rising to a heat that nearly matches the temperatures outside our walls. In celebration, we mark 2 monumental decades with Mark Morial at the helm of the National Urban League. He's led the movement of the Urban League into the modern era, and with his dedication and his steer, this coalition remains as influential as ever in the national conversation on equality and on civil rights. More than a decade into this great organization's 2nd century of service to our nation, we also celebrate a new chapter beginning with the Urban League's Empowerment Center in Harlem. The Urban League will finally, after many, many years, follow the advice we've given to so many, and we will own our own home. This building will serve not only This extraordinary building will serve not only as our national headquarters, but also as the first of its kind urban civil rights museum. It will be home to the National Urban League Institute for Race, Equity, and Justice, and critically, it'll deliver 170 units of affordable housing, all affordable housing, and office space for nonprofits and community groups in Harlem. It's a shared space for the entire Urban League family and also the people we serve, and it's a physical embodiment of what we do, which is empowering communities and changing lives. Thank you. While we celebrate, we also remain focused on the assignment at hand and to recognize the urgency of this moment. There is an ongoing debate today about the best ways to ensure that America's institutions hold up American promises of justice and equality. And reports like the Urban League State of Black America continue to underscore that despite what we might wish, we're simply not there. Economically, socially, and otherwise, the playing fields are not level. And so seeing this persistent gap, many people, particularly younger people, are in fairness examining the very foundations of our nation, from democracy to capitalism. And it's in moments like this we might feel like there's no end in sight to the journey. And while it's true that we'll never live in a society without hardship, it's also true that there's no end in sight to the progress and change we can drive together. There's no end in sight to our willingness to reach across aisles and ideologies to advance our goals, to choose to believe, despite party and policy, that we are all working together to realize shared visions of freedom, equality, and dignity. It's about putting our systems to work with everyone and for everyone. Systems like free enterprise, which have so long been an engine of opportunity and inclusion in our country. And if purpose is the defining stroke of this new phase of capitalism, then we as leaders, particularly the corporate leaders in this room, we must continue our focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. More than just demonstrating purpose, committing to inclusion is how we can create an economy where anyone can thrive because everyone has a fair shot. And the Urban League will remain a partner and champion for all these efforts because there is no end in sight to our embrace of partnership. Just look at the lineup of partners and sponsors for our programming this week. You just heard from Nationwide. This work can't and won't be done alone, so we'll continue to grow and to deepen these relationships. In addition to my role as chair, I join you this week as a representative of MasterCard, another proud and longstanding partner of the Urban League. Over the last 3 years, we at MasterCard have extended our own commitment to inclusion through our In Solidarity initiative, a pledge to invest $500 million in Black communities in the U.S. to help close the racial wealth and opportunity gap. And of course, the National Urban League has been an important partner for us in these efforts. But that spirit of collaboration really extends throughout all of the Urban League's deep roster of partners, so many of whom you've heard from today and yesterday. We support education, workforce solutions, healthcare, voting rights, fair housing, justice programming for Black Americans all across the country. And finally, there's no end in sight to our tradition of leadership. Later today, our young professional leads are driving the forum programming, and we have such a strong showing of the younger generations here with us today. The history of the Urban League and the civil rights movement is defined by young voices that demand change, those that don't wait to be called on to call out systems of injustice. And so it gives me great hope that the National Urban League Young Professionals Network, 64 chapters, 10,000 members strong, is fostering this next generation of civic leaders. We need those young leaders, and we need to do all that we can to support them. Finally, this is the finally, there is no end in sight to our commitment to our mission. All of us collectively carry the torch that was lit 113 years ago to honor, to insist on, to elevate the dignity of Black Americans and all citizens in underserved communities. The work is hard, it can be long, it can be frustrating. You do it every day. You are economic first responders, as Mark says, on the front lines of an ever-changing society. But your impact is enduring, and so there is no end in sight to the legacy that you leave. Thank you for everything you do.
Great remarks by our chairman, Tim Murphy. Let's give him a round of applause once again. And we are strengthened by the power of our Board of Trustees. And our affiliates are strengthened by the power of each of their local boards of directors and boards of trustees. They serve us as volunteers. They help guide, they help support, they direct the work that we do, and Tim has been an outstanding chair and just a guiding force and so supportive of the work we do. So one more time for Tim Murphy. Urban Leaguers, central to our work is the pillar of the 5 pillars that focuses on jobs. If there is any issue or work that the Urban League has been singularly identified with over its modern history, it's been jobs. It was Whitney Young, the great Whitney Young, after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, who said to business America and government America, now that the doors will be opening, we have to ensure that people are prepared, that they're educated and that they are trained, and that you make a meaningful effort to ensure that the promises of the Civil Rights Act are indeed met. It led to the acceleration of the National Urban League's relationship with the United States government, primarily with the Department of Labor. So for more than now 60 years, the Department of Labor has been a central partner of the National Urban League, supporting various forms of job training, job preparation, and job connection programs. The numbers of people each year that are supported in the workforce development space of the Urban League movement is in the 250,000 range. We connect people to jobs. We prepare people for jobs. And the Labor Department's partnership has been central to that. I am excited that with the advent of the Biden-Harris administration, this long-standing relationship has accelerated, where we're doing new and exciting things. Whether it's a CHIPS bill or an infrastructure bill that will create new jobs, we have to ensure that we are ready, we are prepared for those opportunities, and we have to ensure that those that will execute those opportunities are going to be serious about their commitment to equity. So all that to say, I am very honored today that we have coming up next 2 members of the President's economic team who are executing and working to ensure that all of this new thrust in the American economy will be equitable and will be inclusive when it comes to jobs and business opportunities. It has to be equitable if it is going to benefit all people, particularly our community. So with that, I am so proud to introduce all of you to the person who has acting, and we want to get acting out of there, Secretary of the United States Department of Labor. Urban Leaguers, please give an Urban League welcome to Julie Su.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Mark. We are so fortunate to have in this country your voice and your leadership, and to have had it for the last few decades. We are also grateful to work with the Urban League to build a just economy and to continue the long fight for justice and equality. And hello to the Urban League. It's great to be here with all of you, and I'm really glad to have the opportunity to get to share with you the common values and common agenda that our organizations share. For over a century, the Urban League has challenged America to better live up to our founding ideals and to reach for the full promise that our nation was founded on. Being here today, I'm reminded of the words of one of Houston's very own, the late Barbara Jordan, a trailblazing congresswoman and the pride of the 5th Ward. It was Congresswoman Jordan who said, quote, "What the people want is simple. They want an America as good as its promise." An America as good as its promise. Let me tell you what that means to me and my vision for the Department of Labor. My parents immigrated to this country because they also believed in the promise of America, that if you work hard and you play by the rules, you'll have the opportunity to build a good life. For years, they worked minimum wage jobs to get by. But when I was 6 years old, my mom got a job working for LA County, a good union job with predictable hours, paid sick leave, a secure income, health benefits, and a pension. That job gave our family a path to the middle class and the security to sleep a little easier at night. That's why I believe that good jobs change lives, because that's what it did for my family. It brought the promise of America into closer reach for us. I grew up and became the first lawyer in my family, and for the first nearly 20 years of my career, I was a civil rights and workers' rights attorney. So I believe in the work you do because I've done it too. This is personal for me. That deep belief in the transformative power of a good job, that is what informs and animates our work at the Department of Labor. It's how we're building an economy from the middle out and the bottom up, not the top down, as the president always says. And here's what that looks like in practice. First, empowerment. We're empowering and educating workers and putting them at the center of the Biden administration's economic agenda, especially those who have been historically left out and left behind. Second, equity. We are building equity into everything we do, including working with our sister agencies to embed equity standards into federal funding opportunities, the ones that Mark just talked about. Third, enforcement. Believe me when I say we are using every tool in our toolbox to protect workers from wage theft, to keep them safe on the job, to fight discrimination, and to protect their hard-earned pensions, which help families build intergenerational wealth. We can't build the inclusive economy we envision until we start closing the racial wealth gap. In fact, a report a few years ago said that just by closing the racial wealth gap for Black Americans, our national GDP could be 4 to 6% higher in less than a decade. Right? So it's the right thing to do. It's also the smart thing to do. It turns out that ending systemic racism is good economic policy. So for me, this starts with ensuring equity for Black workers. One of the first things I asked when I first got to the Department of Labor was, what are we doing to uplift Black workers? And every day at the department, we are holding ourselves accountable to answer that question. It turns out that under President Biden, we are doing quite a bit. As we speak, the Biden-Harris administration is investing some $2 trillion in America's roads, bridges, airports, and ports. We want to make affordable, reliable internet available in every home and clean drinking water to flow out of every American home. This is the president's Investing in America agenda, and it's also delivering good jobs, a lot of them. So our North Star is connecting workers to those good jobs, especially those who've been left out or left behind in the past. President Biden calls this America's infrastructure decade. I'm sure you've heard him say that too. I like to think of our workforce system as infrastructure too. It's the roads and bridges that connect people to the good jobs they want and need, and employers to the people that they want and need. But let's be honest, our workforce system, like our physical roads and bridges, needs some attention too. It's got some cracks. It's got some potholes. It doesn't connect to every community the way it should. At the Department of Labor, we are building a workforce system infrastructure that's going to be as strong as the physical infrastructure we're building, a system that connects to every community and leaves no one behind. As you'll hear from my friend and colleague, Wally Adeyemo, in a moment, we are seeing historically low unemployment rates for all workers, including Black workers. Labor force participation is higher for Black workers than for white workers right now. Yes, it will not surprise those in this room, Black workers, and especially Black women, are powering our economic recovery. But, as we all know, Black workers still face some of the greatest inequities in our workforce by almost every measure, by pay, access to opportunity, occupational segregation, and by wealth. This tells us that we need to do more and be more intentional about connecting Black workers to meaningful employment and good jobs. And we will do this by taking on the structural and institutional barriers that have existed for far too long. In fact, the Department of Labor has invested $20 million in the National Urban League to partner with labor unions to expand apprenticeship readiness programs. That's a great example of workforce programs done right. It's going to help to ensure, that's right, it's going to help to ensure equitable access to the construction jobs being created from the President's Investing in America agenda. It's developing an open, inclusive pipeline to good jobs in historically underserved communities. The result is a more diverse, more skilled workforce, And that's one example of many of how we are tapping into the talent and possibility of all communities to build our country. And we are just getting started. There's so much more to be done, and we will get it done together. So let me close by acknowledging that I know it's one thing to talk about equity, it's a very different thing to make it real. So I am asking you to keep us honest, to hold us accountable, as I know you will, to these commitments. You know me, you know my team, our door is open. While we build and repair bridges across this country, we can also, and we must also, build the bridge for individuals to real economic security, the bridge for families to the middle class, and the bridge for all of our communities to an America as good as is promised. So let's build together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Sue, one more time for her. And for the benefit, our latest partnership with the Department of Labor is an innovation. It's a three-way partnership between the Department of Labor, the North American Building Trades Unions. This is all of the construction unions in America: carpenters, plumbers, equipment operators, pile drivers, glass workers, steel workers, and the like. And you know that there has historically been barriers for Black people and many times Latinos and women to gain access to these jobs, which are high-paying jobs. So this partnership, through it, we will be recruiting people from our community to join union apprenticeship programs. And so this is an innovation. It's the first of its kind, and you should know that this partnership has come together because of a lot of groundwork. We have worked with the building trades and Sean McGarvey for years. We've worked with DOL for years, and President Biden has said to, as a pro-union president, that he wants the unions to be more inclusive. And this partnership meets that need, Michael Lawson, and meets that promise to do that. So let's thank the DOL and Secretary Sue for the burgeoning and the beginning of this relationship, and we'll be working with a handful of affiliates first with an effort to grow this. So let's put our hands together for jobs, construction jobs, jobs that pay good wages with benefits and retirement efforts. Now, next, it is my pleasure to introduce the Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Treasury, Wally Ademayo. Now, the Treasury Department, yes, they have Fort Knox. Yes, they control the printing of money, but very importantly, they are an agency that has their hands on so much of the American economy and play a central role in helping to design, with other agencies of government and the White House team, the, if you will, economic agenda for the nation. And we are proud of Wally, who is holding the Deputy Secretary's role. His appointment and his participation in that role is indeed historic. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give an Urban League welcome to Deputy Secretary Wally Ademayo.
So let me start out by saying a thank you to Mark for that kind introduction and for inviting me to speak today. And I think one of the things I want to do is thank not only Mark, but back there you have Reverend Sharpton, and in front of me I have a number of people without whom the work that you've done, a person like me would not be sitting in the seat that I'm sitting in today. So please join me in giving a round of applause to Mark for his leadership of this organization. Your fierce advocacy for the Black community has informed and improved the policies of the Biden-Harris administration. You should all know that in this room. And I'm grateful for that leadership and for your ideas and for all of your tireless commitment to service. I'm also honored to be sharing the stage with some of our country's strongest advocates for equity and equality throughout our society, including Julie Su, who spoke before me, who has been not only an advocate in her role now as acting secretary, but in the work she's done in California. And we look forward to working together with her to advance the interest of Black America. The topic today is both, of course, professionally interesting to me, but is also personally interesting to me, given who I am. And this morning, I want to briefly highlight the ways the Biden-Harris administration focuses on an equitable recovery and how that's contributed to this recovery being stronger and faster than any recovery of over the last 40 years. And let me highlight the impact of just 3 initiatives that the administration has implemented in response to the pandemic and how it's impacted Black children, Black families, and the broader community, and explain how these actions fit into our broader economic agenda and how we can work together to advance not only the causes of Black America, but as all of you in this room know so well, when Black America does well, all of America does well. So the first is the Advanced Child Tax Credit, a tax cut for working and middle-class families in America. In 2021, because of the President and Congress's leadership, we increased the maximum credit from $2,000 to $3,000. In addition, we made half of the credit available through an advanced monthly payment, a check that went to families to help them pay for things like school books and to keep their children fed. And as you know better than anyone else, the pandemic hit the Black community hard. And families used this child tax credit to meet their needs for clothing, education, food, housing, and utilities. The child tax credit, alongside all of the other programs of the American Rescue Plan, cut the poverty rate, the supplemental poverty rate for Black families by 40%. That deserves a round of applause. But it also cut the poverty rate amongst Black children by 50%. This is one of the reasons why the President has called for making the Advanced Child Tax Credit permanent. A tax cut for Black families, a tax cut for middle-class families, a tax cut for working families that not only will help contribute to economic growth, but will help keep our children fed. And ultimately, this speaks to one of the policy proposals that matter the most to the President and to the administration, because it not only will help us make sure that our children aren't living in poverty, but it'll help make sure that our families have the resources they need to invest in opportunity, because ultimately an opportunity for Black families, for all families, helps grow our economy over time. During the pandemic, one of the challenges we also faced had to do with housing. And another program that I wanted to mention was the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, a program that the President was focused on making sure not only got to some families, but got to the families that needed it the most. When you look at how laser focused the President was on making sure that people stayed in their homes, a big part of this was due to the fact that in 2018, 7 evictions were filed every minute in the United States. Let me repeat that again. 7 evictions were filed every minute in the United States. And as all of you in this room know well, a home is more than just 4 walls. The lack of housing stability is devastating to a family, worsening health outcomes, impacting financial stability, and stalling the educational progress of our children. And eviction is a problem that, as you also know, disproportionately plagues the Black community. Black renters have historically accounted for 1/3 of all evictions in this country. Recognizing the importance of housing, the President worked to provide $46 billion in rental assistance to families during the pandemic under the American Rescue Plan. Nearly half of each one of those dollars went to Black families. And surprise, surprise, in 2021, when this program was fully up to speed, eviction filings in Black neighborhoods were less than half their historic average. They were cut in half just by this program and the other efforts we put in place. And as the eviction moratoriums that were put in place throughout the country were removed, you saw the rate of evictions remain lower than historic averages in the Black community, and our goal has to be to prevent every preventable eviction, because we know that ultimately a home is more than four walls. It matters to giving us the ability to access opportunity, and that's why the President is so committed to not only affordable housing, but affordable housing that gives people access to opportunity, and that's why he's called for Congress to make additional investments in this area. The third policy that I want to highlight is closing the digital divide. During the pandemic, I was living on the south side of Chicago, and all of these young people were sent home to do at-home learning. And for the parents who had to do at-home learning under the best circumstances, it was hard, it was terrible. But for those kids living on the south side of Chicago, many of them didn't have access to tablets, and if they did have access to computers, they didn't have access to high-speed internet. That's why the President's been focused on closing the digital divide, providing $10 billion for broadband projects through the Capital Project Fund. Today in the United States, nearly 40% of Black households lack fixed high-speed broadband access. In our rural communities, both Black and white Americans disproportionately lack access. We know that investments in broadband spurs job growth, boosts business formation, and improves health outcomes. In just over a year, the Department of Treasury has provided $7 billion for projects in 46 states that will reach 2 million families, businesses, in addition to thousands of individuals who are lacking service annually. The President is committed to closing the digital divide because he knows that closing the digital divide is critical to building our economy and building the Black economy especially. We took these historic actions in response to the damage caused by the pandemic, but these were actions that were needed long before the pandemic, and that's why the President, Secretary Yellen, and our entire economic team recognized the need to provide families with not just immediate support for the economic recovery, but also to make sure that we take steps to make sure that the economic expansion is also equitable going forward. Today, standing in front of you talking about the economic recovery from the pandemic, it's important for us to remember what has happened in other recoveries. Following the 2001 recession and the global financial crisis, the Black unemployment rate took about 6 and 8 years respectively to recover. After the previous two recessions, the Black labor force participation rate never fully recovered. The truth is that for many Black Americans, they were simply getting back to where they were before the financial crisis when the pandemic hit. The President directed our team to do things differently this time in order to make sure that those the hardest hit by the pandemic were given the first access to resources to get through the pandemic. And 3 years after the start of the pandemic, the Black unemployment rate is back to pre-pandemic levels. This spring had the lowest unemployment rate ever for Black women. Also this spring, for the first time, a greater share of Black Americans was employed than white Americans. 3 years after the height of the pandemic, the Black labor force participation rate has recovered to its pre-recession levels already. For those in the workforce, real wages are going up as well. Over the last several years, real median weekly wages for Black workers rose by 4%, compared to 1% for the rest of the economy. But there's more that we need to do, and that's why we're gathered here today to talk not only about what we've done, but what we need to do to make sure that we have not just an equitable recovery, but we continue to build an equitable economy. And the thing to remember, as you all know so well, is that these things don't happen by accident. They require the hard work and dedication of all of you in this room. And over the course of my time as Deputy Secretary, one of the most important lessons that we've learned is that we in government cannot do it alone. Ultimately, the way that we make sure that the communities that need access to our services the most get access is by working in collaboration and in coordination with groups like the Urban League, who are doing the hard work on the ground each and every day. So my message to you is that we've got to keep it going. We've got to stay engaged. We've got to make sure that the resources that exist today through the historic bills that have been passed by the Biden-Harris administration reach the people who need them most. And I look forward as the Deputy Secretary, working closely with Secretary Yellen and the rest of the President's economic team, to doing the important work to make sure that not only the Black economy thrives, but we know when the Black economy thrives, the entire American economy thrives. So thank you so much for having me. Look forward to continuing the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Wally. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights in the U.S. Department of Justice, Kristen Clark. But before she joins us, let me emphasize that the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice is the primary vehicle or mechanism for the government's enforcement of civil rights laws. There are other agencies like EEOC, offices of civil rights throughout the government. But the Division of Civil Rights historically has been central to this. This generation's agenda when it comes to civil rights is multifaceted. But one thing that is clear is the enforcement of the laws that have been placed on the books because of sweat and toil and struggle over the last 60 years. Kristen Clark is the point person for this. And she is, and comes to the Department of Justice with a civil rights record, leading the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, working with the Legal Defense Fund, and a prior stint early in her career as a lawyer in the Civil Rights Division. So I am delighted and honored to bring to the stage Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark.
Good morning. I am honored and delighted to have this opportunity to address you today. And I want to thank Mark for that gracious introduction, and also thank Mark on 20 extraordinary years leading this fine organization. Congratulations, Mark. The National Urban League has a storied history in civil rights. You all have been fighting on behalf of Black people and other communities of color for 113 years. You stood shoulder to shoulder with Dr. Martin Luther King at the March on Washington in August of 1963. Your former director, Whitney Young, created the Domestic Marshall Plan, which significantly influenced Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs. Your list of accomplishments is long, but what is truly remarkable is that your vitality, your ingenuity, and your commitment have not waned. Through 92 local affiliates, you continue to pursue an empowerment agenda, working with unremitting passion to improve the lives of Black people. So my first mission is to thank you, to say thank you for 11 decades of work on economic empowerment and social justice. Thank you all for your advocacy and your commitment to closing the economic gap between Black Americans and white Americans in our country. Unfortunately, that gap has proved remarkably enduring. The Urban League's semi-annual Equality Index compares how well Black and white people are doing with respect to their economic status, health, education, social justice, and civic engagement. And overall, the index for Black people in 2022 was nearly 74%. Economically, Black people were 62% as well off compared to whites in 2022. Racial gaps continue to pervade almost every aspect of American life: health, employment, income, property ownership, life expectancy, environmental exposure, and incarceration. That's why the Supreme Court's recent holding in Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard is a deep disappointment. The court dismissed the university's assessment of the educational benefits or even the relevance of racial diversity. But as Justice Jackson's dissent powerfully recognized, our country has never been colorblind. given the lengthy history of state-sponsored race-based preferences in America, to say that anyone is now victimized if a college considers whether that legacy of discrimination has unequally advantaged its applicants fails to acknowledge the well-documented intergenerational transmission of inequality that still plagues our citizenry. The court has made it more difficult to remedy racial disparities, but you and I, we are part of the civil rights movement. We are used to difficult times. And difficult or not, the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice will continue to work to expand opportunity and achieve diversity on college campuses in our country. And I want you to know that we were prepared for this moment. The day that the court issued its ruling, the White House called on us, along with the Department of Education, to distribute a resource document in 45 days. And we are actively working on this document now. We will make it available for you, for colleges and universities, students, and other key stakeholders shortly. Despite the court's decision, there is still much that colleges and universities can do. They can and should ensure that their admissions policies identify and reward the attributes they most value: hard work, achievement, potential, and determination. The Supreme Court recognized that race can be relevant in this regard. The court expressly stated that nothing in its opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected their life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. In addition, colleges and universities can intensify efforts to recruit and retain talented students from underserved communities, including those with large numbers of students of color. Schools can bolster need-based financial support and partner with school districts in underserved areas to nurture students' potential and prepare them to get into and thrive at colleges and universities. But as the Urban League has recognized, though any effort to remedy the opportunity deficit in this country, any effort to address these issues, we have to deal with racial animus. FBI statistics show a nationwide increase in hate crimes of about 11% between 2020 and 21. White supremacy and racially motivated hate crimes remain a threat to our democracy. Hate crimes targeting people based on their race and ethnicity, religion, or sexual orientation all increased and remain far too common. The Justice Department's response to this rise in hate has been robust and resolute. Since January of 2021, we have charged more than 90 defendants with bias-motivated crimes in more than 80 cases. That includes charges against the man who killed 10 Black people at a Tops grocery store in Buffalo, New York, based on his view that Black people are trying to replace white people in this country. It includes the man who gunned down 23 people and wounded 22 more at the Walmart in El Paso, Texas, victims targeted for no other reason than their Hispanic identity and national origin. That man was sentenced to 90 consecutive life sentences just 2 weeks ago. And it includes the defendant recently found guilty for the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where 11 Jewish people were murdered as they peacefully worshiped. The sentencing phase of that case is underway as we speak. In March, a Mississippi man was sentenced to 42 months in prison for burning a cross in his front yard with the intent to intimidate a neighboring Black family. And right here in Texas, a man recently received a 25-year sentence for a knife attack on an Asian family, targeted because he believed they were Chinese and responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic. In all, since January of 2021, we have convicted more than 70 defendants for hate crimes, and that includes the 3 white men in Georgia who killed Ahmaud Arbery just because he was black. "115 miles from here, James Byrd, a black man, was dragged to his death in Jasper, Texas, just about 25 years ago, targeted by white supremacists because of his race. Let's never forget his name. It is the federal law. It is the federal law that bears his name, the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act that we use every day to hold perpetrators of hate accountable, work that we will continue to carry out in every corner of this country. For hate crime victims, and frankly all crime victims, there needs to be community trust of law enforcement to ensure that those crimes are reported. But police misconduct erodes that trust and undermines public safety. One of our key priorities is to hold law enforcement officers accountable when they violate civil and constitutional rights. That work is driven by one core principle. All of us, all Americans, deserve constitutional, fair, and non-discriminatory policing. To that end, we secured federal convictions against Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis officer who killed George Floyd, and the 3 officers who stood around and watched and failed to intervene and failed to render medical care. Derek Chauvin received more than 20 years and is now serving that sentence in prison. And we all remember the tragic death of Breonna Taylor, who died 3 years ago at the hands of Louisville police officers. Officers drafted what they knew was a false affidavit to support a search warrant for Ms. Taylor's home. And when officers executed the warrant, they broke down the door to her apartment. Last summer, the Justice Department charged the officers who falsified the warrant and another who recklessly discharged his firearm during the execution of the warrant. One of those officers has already pleaded guilty. And we're also investigating police departments that engage in systemic misconduct. And I'm pleased to share that just yesterday, we announced the opening of a federal investigation into whether the Memphis Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of conduct that violates our Constitution and our federal civil rights laws. We're looking at use of excessive force, unlawful stops, searches, and arrests, and discriminatory treatment of black people. We will not stand for this. Last month, we completed our investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department, where we found that the department engaged in a pattern or practice of misconduct. We found that they used excessive force, both deadly and less lethal, and in reviewing 19 police shootings, including 1 in-custody death from 2016 to 2022, we found that officers used deadly force without probable cause to believe there was a serious threat of harm to the officer or any other person. We also found, based on a review of 187,000 traffic and pedestrian stops, that the police unlawfully discriminated against Black and Native American people in its enforcement activities. We found that they retaliated against protesters and journalists exercising their First Amendment rights. And we also found that the police department and city discriminated against people with behavioral health disabilities when responding to calls for assistance. We're working with the city right now to negotiate a consent decree that will include the reforms needed to ensure constitutional policing as we move forward. Thank you. We announced similar findings in March for Louisville, Kentucky, and we currently have investigations pending in Phoenix, Louisiana, New York City, and other parts of the country. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tyree Nichols, they should all be alive today. I know that the Urban League cares deeply about economic justice, and as I close, I want to talk briefly about the work that we're doing to take on banks and financial institutions that are engaged in modern-day redlining. We are working to hold them accountable. We're working to hold them accountable when they fail to provide equal access to credit to Black people and other people of color. Our redlining initiative, announced just 2 years ago, has secured over $88 million in relief for impacted people in communities. In January, we obtained our largest redlining settlement ever, involving City National Bank in Los Angeles, providing more than $31 million to affected people and communities. And we've secured similar settlements here in Houston, in Columbus, Philadelphia, Memphis, and we're going to keep on fighting. Redlining has inflicted serious long-term economic harm on the Black community, stripping away opportunities for generational wealth, and we are determined to stop it. We also know that democratic rights are under attack, and earlier this month we took action to challenge a new Mississippi law mandating appointment of special judges and prosecutors by Mississippi state officials in majority Black Jackson and Hinds County. Our complaint alleges that the state violated the Constitution by creating a new two-tiered system of justice, which displaces Black elected officials and creates a new system led by judges and prosecutors handpicked and appointed by majority white state officials. This thinly veiled takeover is intended to strip power, voice, and resources away from Jackson and Hinds County's predominantly Black electorate. Our complaint alleges that this is unconstitutional and discriminatory, and we are going to continue to fight these efforts across our country. These are just some of the issues that we're tackling in the Civil Rights Division. We're fighting for environmental justice in places like Lowndes County, Alabama, where generations of Black people have been denied the right to basic sanitation and exposed to raw sewage. We're addressing the unconstitutional conditions inside our jails and prisons. We're fighting disability rights cases to stand up for our nation's most vulnerable. You know the magnitude of the challenges that lie ahead and the obstacles we will face, the threadbare excuses for inequality and discrimination that we will hear. But I'm confident that none of these hurdles will divert you from the quest for justice and equality. I promise that they will not deter us at the Justice Department. Too many heroes have sacrificed, too many have fought, suffered, and died to advance civil rights, and we can't afford to slacken our efforts now. I want you to know that you have a friend, you have a partner in this Justice Department, and I look forward to walking with you arm in arm as we push for justice and equality across our country. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Kristen Clark, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give it up one more time. Thank you, Kristen. Next, I'm proud to bring to the stage the CEO and National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Together with ADL last year, several of us, including ADL, the National Action Network, the National Urban League, the Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, and others, called on the White House to host a hate crime summit. And together we put a spotlight on this rise in hate in America and the things we need to do to address it. So with that, I'm proud to welcome to the stage, and please give an Urban League welcome to Jonathan Greenblatt.
Good morning, everyone. As Mark said, my name's Jonathan Greenblatt. I'm the CEO and National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. ADL is the oldest anti-hate organization in America, and we fight anti-Semitism and bigotry here in the US and around the world. And I'm honored to be here today. And I want to thank my good friend, my partner, Mark Morial, for this invitation to join all of you. You know, for Mark and the Urban League, I wouldn't hesitate to fly down to join you in Houston in the summer during a heat wave. But the truth is, though, I don't need to fly down to Houston to see Mark because he and I are working together all the time. Whether it's pushing the White House to hold that summit on hate crimes, creating a new coalition that we launched to protect our houses of worship, HBCUs and JCCs, or just last week, relaunching the Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations. ADL and the National Urban League are working side by side to fight bigotry and hate. Now, there are those who can't understand, and I hear from them, why either side would work with each other. They say to me, why are you focused on this? And to them I say, the top supermarket in Buffalo, Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, Mother AME in Charleston, 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Chabad in Poway, Congregation Beth Israel just down the road in Colleyville. If they don't remember these places as horrific sites of anti-Black and anti-Jewish violence, I remind them of ADL's annual online hate and harassment survey. We do it every year. We do it to keep the social media companies accountable. And in our earlier report that we introduced last January for 2023, we found that Black Americans experience the highest rates of harassment of any racial or ethnic group online. Think about that. This is all of you. It's your children. It's your grandchildren. And I also remind them that last year, we recorded the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents since ADL started tracking these acts more than 4 decades ago. And I tell them that the fates of the Black and Jewish communities are intertwined. We are the shared strands of DNA encoded into the fabric of America. Because it's unfortunate that anti-Black racism remains alive and well, that anti-Jewish hate remains alive and well. And we at ADL believe deeply, fiercely, that you gotta battle both if you really wanna win. Our communities will never be safe if all of us aren't equally safe. This country, this union can't live up to its promise if any of us are denigrated, demonized, dehumanized, made to live in fear because of how we look or where we pray or who we love. And I know that sometimes, of late, it might feel like we can't make progress. That the prejudice is everywhere. That the racists and the bigots are winning. Or even that our two communities are paralyzed by misunderstanding. And there are those who say there's more that divides us than what unites us. And I know that those sentiments, it's dispiriting. But I also know that that is not reality. It's not. It's not what happens when people actually talk and meet and spend time with each other. And I see that in the work that I do with Mark. And I see that in the work that our folks do with all of you from the Urban League. And I see it in my own life. I see it in my friendship with Nick Cannon. Some of you may know Nick. He's a busy man. Got a few kids. And it may surprise you, as I stand here today, to tell you that Nick and I are very close friends. After all, Nick is a famous singer, TV host, stand-up comedian, radio DJ, who was once married to mega superstar Mariah Carey. And I'm, not quite any of that. But I'd put my wife up next to Mariah Carey any day of the week. But for the past few years, Nick and I, we talk every Sunday. Every single Sunday. Why is that? Because we've got a lot to learn from each other. Now, it's a long story, and the people back there are going to tell you do not have time to tell that story. But quickly, back in the summer of 2020, you see that? they're going to give me to start playing the music. Nick said some things about the Jewish community that weren't just wrong, they were hurtful. And I called him out, and then he called me up to come by and to talk, to learn and to understand. See, Nick and I both believe in counsel culture, not cancel culture. So what this means is that when someone makes a mistake, you don't push them away, you pull them in. You engage rather than disengage. You extend your hand to help the offender, to make amends so that together you can make a difference. Now, our conversations and that shared belief came together in a podcast that we now both do every single month. On his own dime, Nick flies out from LA, a whole production crew. They set up in our conference room at ADL, and we then invite amazing folks, like some of you may know or have heard of Michael Eric Dyson, incredible author and thinker, amazing man. Sports personality Stephen A. Smith, radio host Shelley Wade, and lots of others to join us every week to tackle tough issues and talk about confronting difference, creating change, bridging communities, because that's the work that we do together. And we do this because we need to be there for each other. Nick and I and all of us know we can't fight alone. That's why I was so honored to be asked to co-host next month the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, and why I can't wait to stand with my brother Mark Morial, with Reverend Al Sharpton, with Martin Luther King Jr. III, and with the legacy. We stand on the shoulders of giants like Martin's father, Dr. King, and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And we will remember the sacrifice of heroes like Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman. Heroes like Ben Epstein and Roy Wilkins. Heroes who stood there when it was hard, who marched against hate, and who gave us all hope. And Mark and Reverend Al and I will rededicate ourselves to the work ahead. So Mark and all of you here, my friends at the Urban League, please keep up your amazing work. Please do not back down. Don't relent in the fight. And know, all of you should know that your allies at ADL, we will be there with you every step of the way. Thank you so much.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Jonathan Greenblatt another round of applause. Now, coming up next, we're going to have a rapid-fire conversation with Reverend Al Sharpton and Melanie Campbell, followed by our featured, if you will, panel for the morning, which will include the mayors of 4 great American cities. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage at this time one of the nation's preeminent civil rights leaders, someone who's been with us every year over the last 2 decades, the Reverend Al Sharpton. And then my sister in the civil rights struggle, Melanie Campbell of the Black Women's Roundtable and the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. Melanie Campbell, come on out.
And when I wake up, I recognize you looking at me for the pay cut. Be all
Thank you very much. Testing. Please have a seat. No, you good? Let me go right to you, Reverend Al, and Melanie, I'll come to you next. In this moment, you have planned a commemorative march on August 26th in Washington, D.C. to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the historic March on Washington. Some say, Rev, you know this, why march? Some say, why now? Why march and why now?
Well, first of all, 60 years ago, people asked why march. And the reason you march, marching does not solve a problem. It exposes a problem. But if someone doesn't expose it, it does not put pressure on those in power to solve it. We have more reason to march this year than we've had in many years. In the last 60 days, we've seen the court just about kill affirmative action. They've made it all right to say that based on your business principles, your own personal beliefs, you can discriminate, which they did with the LGBT decision. They stopped the forgiveness of student loans. All of this in the last 60 days. Then you get to Florida, where they're now trying to whitewash black history and say openly that slavery was a jobs training program and that it was something that elevated us. If there ever was a time that we ought to show up in big numbers to show the Senate and the Congress, tens of thousands of us standing together, now's the time. I can't think of any other time.
And Urban League Movement, will we be there? Urban League Movement and friends, will we be there? Melanie, black women have become pivotal in electoral politics. We can celebrate Ketanji Brown Jackson. We can celebrate Kamala Harris. We can celebrate the record number of federal appeals court judges who are black women appointed by President Biden, and the record number of black women who serve in elected office. We can celebrate you and your advocacy. What's the state of the struggle, and how would you define progress versus challenge when it comes to black women in America?
Thank you. But I want to say this again. Mark asked a question. How many of y'all are going to be August the 26th, changing your vacations, right? Change it. How many of y'all going to be in D.C. on August 26th? How many of y'all going to be there on August 26th? I'm a native Floridian.
How about if I got a room at the Four Seasons for you?
And I tell you, we don't have the time. But Mark, you laid out some of the gains that we've made. So I'm going to say it again. We have the first black woman sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court in the United States. That's a lifetime position. And if you don't do anything, follow her dissent. Follow what she writes. And then we know what the future can look like when we go and shift the power of what happens in being able to put in another black person. We only have one. There's one that gets lost. He's lost. But for black women, we've made a lot of gains. But we make those gains in a way that's about moving our community forward together. We have challenges still. We still, yesterday was the what they call Black Women's Equal Pay Day, or unequal pay day. We only make 67 cents to the dollar, so we got work to do. Say we got work to do, right? We still need the Equal Rights Amendment passed. Say ERA needs to be passed. And so there are things, especially on the economic front, things around, of course, we know with reproductive rights. You know, I grew up Baptist/AME. I don't care. We're not talking about faith. We're talking about what's right about the human body, and that women have a right to control our bodies. Say, control our bodies. So there's much work more to be done, but we have moving forward, and the power of our vote is undeniable. Undeniable, and we can shift what's going down there in my home state, in Florida, if we come together.
Thank you very much. Melanie Campbell. Reverend Al, you have had an opportunity to witness many, many presidents in action. Some we've worked with, some we've had to fight. What is, for Black America and those of all races, backgrounds, for whom civil rights is a priority, equity is a priority, how do we evaluate a president?
I think we evaluate a president by what happens directly from their administration in terms of legislation and tone. When you have a president that does not try and push legislation, but even more importantly sets a tone of bigotry. When you hear Jonathan Greenblatt talk about the rise in anti-Semitic attacks, the rise in blacks being harassed, the rise in Latinos, all of whom are going to be marching with us, there's a tone set. And we know that behind every step forward, there'll be a backlash. Behind Lincoln, there was Reconstruction, then backlash. We should have known behind Obama it would be a backlash. Now, we didn't know it would be Donald Trump, but it was. I think the tone that this administration has set, a black woman vice president, making sure that blacks got their share in the inflation reduction, making sure we get our share of the business contracts in infrastructure development. The tone and the legislation is right. And as you know, Mark, in the 90s, we fought Joe Biden over the crime bill when he was over judiciary. But for 8 years, when we worked with Barack Obama and he was in the room with you and I and others, Joe Biden fought before he was president. So people ask me, well, he's old. You know, I had to go for something National Action Network was doing with the young people, and I knew it was going to be a long day, and I looked in the closet, and one of my daughters had given me for Father's Day some brand new shoes that was bad, that looked excellent for that crowd. But I said, but I'm going to be out there all day, so I chose the old shoes that I know would last all day. I'd rather have some old shoes that work than some new shoes that are hurting me in a little while.
That's powerful. Melanie, the issue of reproductive rights is part of a larger issue with respect to health disparities and women's right to control certain decisions regarding their own body. In and amongst black women, how does this issue resonate? How is it framed? What are your thoughts? Is it an issue that elevates and animates and encourages turnout? Is it an issue that encourages and animates a bigger discussion about health disparities? How do you see it?
Well, it's we'll say intersectional, right? It's connected. So when you think about the issue, a lot of times we don't want to talk about abortion. That's just how many of us were raised. But the reality is, black women still, we die more than many quote unquote third countries when it comes to dying at childbirth, giving birth. Right? And so when you talk about not having control of your body, that means if something goes wrong, we're going to have we're going to be hardest hit. There's also an economic impact when it comes to being able to control having children, when to have children. And even if you need access to it, and we call it, and the phrase was coined many, many years ago, reproductive justice. Is when people say abortion, when you talk about reproductive justice, being able to control your body, that's one big critical issue. Is it the driver for black women turnout? No, the driver for black women and men is the issue still for the last 4 years, Rev. We do this Essence poll with Black Women's Roundtable. It's still racism. We see racism as the #1 issue impacting us. And as an issue, we see voting rights now high on the list. And so issues around rights and our freedoms are high on the list. But racism, ever since Donald Trump got in office, quite frankly, it went from dealing with college education to racism. And there's a reason for that. Just go to Florida. Right here in Texas, right? And across this country. So that's what black women are concerned about.
I got one last question for both of you. Reverend Sharpton, we're in Texas. And of course, we celebrate here in Texas Sylvester Turner, the elected officials here in the city of Houston, and Houston as a progressive, to some extent, outlier within the state of Texas. But Texas also has a governor and a state legislature that have not put their thumb and put their fist on the scale of injustice. What message send you, Reverend Al, to Governor Abbott and the Texas State Legislature?
I think that Governor Abbott, when I was growing up, we would read about in New York, I'm a New Yorker, about George Wallace and Lester Maddox in the South. They were the segregationists. The ones that have become the modern version of fighting against racial equality, racial truth, and fairness have been the 21st century's version of Abbott and Costello. And that's Governor Abbott and Ron DeSantis. And we are not going to let these two social comedians change the tone of where this country's going. Abbott is, in my opinion, a symbol of everything we're fighting in the civil rights movement of the 21st century.
And you, just Melanie, I want to ask you about DeSantis, because you're from the great metropolitan area of Mims, Florida.
Everybody's been there, great destination.
Talk about, real quick,
Bottom line, we have to go into Florida. We have, anybody in from Florida? We have to start 2024 election now. Florida, Tallahassee, ground zero. We're going to be organizing a Power of the Ballot campaign. We will not be erased. We will not be wiped out. We will stand together. We have the power if we show up together and make it happen and send the message, because Florida is the national campaign. Texas is the national campaign. We have to vote, organize, and get it done. Thank you, Mark.
Melanie Campbell, Reverend Al Sharpton, give it up. And before Reverend Al departs, Reverend Al, scheduled tonight to receive a major award from the National Urban League, our highest award, has business to tend to back in New York, cannot stay with us. So it's my pleasure right now to present to Reverend Al Sharpton with incredible thanks for 20 years of brotherhood and partnership between you and I and the National Action Network and the National Urban League. It's truly been a joy and a pleasure to work with you, to learn from you, to share with you, and for us to be in this fight together. So ladies and gentlemen, please give Reverend Sharpton a warm round of applause, a standing ovation with great thanks.
Let me thank you. Let me thank you, Mark, and the National Urban League. On behalf of National Action Network, one of our senior board members, not in age, but in service, Reverend Terry Anderson, who pastors one of the major churches in Houston, is here with me to accept this award. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Al Sharpton, Melanie Campbell, let's give it up. We are going to transition quickly
I recognize you looking at me for the pay cut. Be alright.
Oh.
All right, here we go. Start here.
And here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome to the stage the Mayor of New York City, the Honorable Eric Adams, the Mayor of Los Angeles, the Honorable Karen Bass, the Mayor of the City of Chicago, the Honorable Brandon Johnson, and our host mayor, the Mayor of the great city of Houston, the Honorable Sylvester Turner. Ladies and gentlemen, first time on stage. These four represent experience, power, and promise. So let's give it up for these four great mayors of major American cities. Now, Mayor Turner.
Yes, sir.
You're the OG here now. Brother Turner, because of this thing called term limits, you don't have them in Chicago.
Don't even bring it up.
But Mayor Turner, I think it's helpful as you reflect on your time in office and the journey and the struggles and the travails. What wisdom and advice would you impart to our colleagues this morning?
Look, being mayor is unlike many other things. There are certain things we plan, we lay out, we come in with certain priorities, and we map them out. But it's the things you have not planned for that you have to deal with. And then there are things that happen that are not under your control, where you may have to work with, for example, the state, and the state may not want to work with you, or you have to work with the feds. But my advice is, number one, you can't do it all by yourself. This is it's a team effort, and so you have to have the right people around you. And you have to people who are capable, competent, highly qualified, but people who are also dedicated to you.
Loyal.
And loyal. Because you can have the best people, and they can be smart, but if they're not loyal, it does not work.
You said something.
And so, yeah.
You mean they're smart but stupid.
And so you can't, you hold on to those where you can check the box, but when people show you that they are not rowing in the same direction, you do what we do, and you call them in at 4 o'clock on a Friday, and you thank them for their service. But their season here has passed.
It's over. Close the door. Thank you. Let's give Mayor Turner a round of applause. He's been a great, incredible. Mayor Bass, you're 6 months in now?
7.
7 months in? Good to see you still smiling.
Yes,
definitely. Did you make the right decision by leaving a safe, comfortable seat in Congress to run for mayor of Los Angeles?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. And you know, and it wasn't that I was tired of Congress at all. I mean, I love being in Congress. I love the work, especially the work on Africa. But our folks were dying. Our folks are dying on the streets of Los Angeles. We got 46,000 people sleeping in tents. Black folk are 8% of the city, 34% of the people in tents. What I was worried about was that we were getting ready to repeat the 90s and criminalize those folks. And so I feel very, very good because we cannot repeat history. People on the street need help. They need housing. They need health care. And if I can play a role in that, wherever it is, I'm thrilled to be there and to take on the challenge.
Good. Mayor Bass of Los Angeles, Mayor Adams, and I get a chance to watch the mayor every day because I'm in New York, so I watch him, and he's brought a dynamism and a leadership and one of the things about being mayor, you got to let everybody know you're in charge. You got to let everybody know that the buck stops at your desk. Mayor, now about 18 months roughly in, what's the biggest surprise you've encountered in that 18-month period being mayor of New York?
That's a great question. And I say this over and over again that, people say being the mayor of the New York City is the second most difficult job in America. And I say, when does the hard part start? Because I know what hard is. Hard is picking cotton from sun up to sundown, delivering your baby in the field and going back. Hard is watching people jump over you in promotions when you dedicated your life. Hard is what my mother did, raising 6 children with being really abandoned and betrayed by government. Hard is being a little black child growing up, being dyslexic, then being arrested. And I like to say being rejected, but now I'm elected to be the mayor of the city of New York. So I know what hard is. I know what hard is. I wake up every day with a clear agenda, and I'm not going to be distracted. And you're not going to spend the time that I was running for office trying to degrade me, and then you want to pick my staff and tell me who to hire. I'm going to hire competent people who have my vision, rowing in my direction. That is why, first time in history, I hired a black police commissioner. I hired a Hispanic to run my correctional facility. I hired the first African-American, first deputy mayor, first Indian-American to be a deputy mayor, first Filipino-American to be a deputy mayor, first Korean-American to be in charge of small business services, first African-American, first Trinidadian woman deputy mayor. I picked my team that's reflective of the city. If you want to be on my team, you have to have gone through a lot so you could help people who are going through a lot. That is how you run a city. And brother, we're running it. We're running it. People are blown away with all that we inherited. Remember, January 1st, 2022, I inherited COVID. We navigated through that. Now I have 91,000 asylum seekers in my city, can't work. I have to feed, clothe, house, educate their children, and we're doing it. The bond raters who determine where you invest your money gave me a AA rating because of how I'm managing the city. You're seeing competent leadership. So the only surprise that I have is, why is it taking the national media so long to determine that black mayors can run city and they can run it right?
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Now I had to get out of my seat on that one.
Amen. Yes, sir. And Mayor Johnson, when I see you, I can't help but think of the legend, Harold Washington, who was a pace setter, an inspiration for me, and one who inspired me to seek the mayor's office in New Orleans. Chicago has been longing for the spirit and the fight of Harold Washington since his untimely death in 1987. As you begin and as you think, how is Harold Washington's time a guide, an inspiration for you?
Well, thank you. That's a good question. And had I known we would have a sanctified crowd this morning.
You at the Urban League, brother.
I don't know what I was thinking. Of course, it's a sanctified crowd. But I'm grateful here. I want to thank Mayor Turner and Bass and Adams for their leadership and direction. The text messages, the calls of concern and hope have been a tremendous inspiration and has helped balance me through these first 11 weeks. When you grow up and you've experienced the 80s, you hear from your father, your grandfather, your uncles and aunts, about a time of promise and hope. And Chicago is rich in legacy, right? And so I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge Chairman Fred, who said healthcare for all.
Yeah.
He said every child should eat before they go to school, right? That comes out of the Black Panther Party ideology and movement that was birthed on the west side of Chicago where I live, right? And when I think about, of course, the time that Dr. King spent on the west side of Chicago, and he understood the importance of the civil rights movement and the labor rights movement, and understanding that that collision had enormous potential. And he said that the rights of labor and the fight for civil rights are one and the same. The enemy of the Negro is the enemy of labor. And so then, of course, you have this ushering in of Black liberation through the election of Mayor Harold Washington. And it was, of course, 40 years ago that a Black mayor said sanctuary city. You know, I'm not sure if he knew that this day would come, but somehow he understood the prophetic assignment that he had. And so now, you know, when I'm moving through the streets of Chicago, the one thing that I do appreciate about Black folks, especially Black people, is that our hopes and aspirations are tied and linked to one another. And we are very clear that we didn't get here alone.
Amen.
And I'm glad that we serve a God that doesn't drop us off along the way. And so
How you gonna
when
preach?
I think about, so, I mean, since y'all doing it, you know, so just as a disclaimer, I was raised in the Church of God in Christ. So see, there's always a couple of Kojic people here.
yeah.
So
Sanctified.
this conference, this panel just got 1 hour longer.
Yeah, we're gonna keep on going.
But the point though is that these moments don't leave us behind. These moments propel us forward. And so it's a reflection of the incredible resilience of our ancestors, and I'm glad that I get to stand on the shoulders of those who have been here before.
So I learned when I served as mayor of New Orleans from 94 to 02. When I took office, I was the first person elected in some 60 years that did not have the endorsement of the local newspaper. It was definitional because from the very beginning, what the local newspaper did is they put a team of reporters on me, one to play nice and one to play nasty. The one that played nice tried to make friends. The one that played nasty was looking in garbage cans. And this is important for Black mayors, right? And I really want, and every city's a little bit different, you know, the way, but mayors now and elected officials now have an independent channel called social media.
Right.
To be able to talk to people. And I think what I'd like each of you to maybe address, Mayor Bass, we can go first, a little bit about how you think about the importance of the media and communicating with the public, because it's important for constituents to understand that it is absolutely abundantly clear that Black mayors don't get treated the same. Period. Time after time, example after example. No matter what you do, you could have an S on your chest. You could leap tall buildings in a single bound. But how do you think about that from a Los Angeles perspective?
Well, and you know, we can talk race, but also add in gender. I will talk about it because that's dynamic as well. When I started, the whole way I was being framed was, well, is she gonna be like Eric Garcetti, the previous mayor, as though I had done nothing before. I'd been in Congress, I'd been in the state legislature,
and the speaker.
Speaker of the House, but was I gonna be him? But you know, to me, I mean, my background and my root and my heart is as a community organizer. And so to me, communication means communicating on every single level. And the grassroots level is critically important. And that social media helps with that, but not enough. I mean, you have to get out and talk to people. You have to provide every kind of forum and vehicle. One of the things that we did in Congress that I plan to do in the city was telephone town halls. So I used every vehicle, in-person town halls, telephone town halls, social media. But one of the things that makes social media tough is that anybody can call themselves media and a newspaper. And so what I'm finding, and I'm sure my three colleagues up here are finding too, you'll have crazy news sources do an article that just make up stuff. And then 3 days later, quote unquote, mainstream newspapers or radio will pick it up. And then it becomes a legitimate story. But I think it's very important to be proactive. It's very important to have your own frame, but your own analysis, not just a soundbite, but an analysis about what it is that you're talking about. Because I believe that one of the most important things about communication is education. It's not just making, a statement or a slogan or a soundbite, but what is it that you're trying to say that is consistent with your values, and my values rooted in social and economic justice.
Mayor Turner, thank you very much. Mayor Bass, again, asking you to reflect on what's worked well when it comes to your ability to communicate to the citizens of Houston. What is it that you may know now that you wish you understood better when you started on the issue of communicating with the public?
Well, it is important as mayors that we maintain and even enhance our connection to the people that we serve. We have to become our best communicators. And what I have learned over the last 8 years as mayor, is that I have to be out there talking directly to the people. I have to be amongst them and tell what we are doing, listen to them, be accessible to them, and then hope that they too become your ambassadors. And so when they are seeing or reading stories, they themselves can say, that's not true. And I have had people, as I've gone throughout the city, after they have read something or heard something, they will say, Mayor, we know that's not true. So we have to be out there. But I'm constantly reminded what my mom said in growing up, and then she said, life is not fair. But you still have to learn to navigate through it. And so we have to be very careful that we don't become so obsessed with the negativity that we lose focus. When I first came in as mayor, the city had been facing a pension problem for some 20-some years. And right there on the front of the paper, it said, Mayor must fix the pension problem now. And I said, hell, I just got here. But it was, I have to fix it. But we fixed it. And so a pension problem that was $8.2 billion when we came in is now less than $2.2 billion and going down. But what I've also discovered is that you have media that will flash a camera on the problem, but they don't give you much credit on the success. And then the ball keeps moving. You fix this and this comes up. The last point that I will make, we just did this African trade mission to, trade and investment mission to Africa. In my 8 years, we have gone to Europe, we have gone to Asia, we've gone to Latin America, we have gone to the Middle East, and I've not received any negative play from the media, or quite frankly, from anybody else. The business community has gone with us, so we've gone all over the world. Now, just recently, I go to Africa. And here come the television station saying, why is the mayor going to Africa? Is this a personal junket?
Double standard.
Is this a personal junket?
Standard.
Should he be using taxpayers' money to pay for this? So you get all of that. And so sometimes I do my best not to respond. You have to say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Patience.
But then on this one, I did go to social media. And what I said is that I've gone to all of these other places, no negative criticism. Now, all of a sudden, I go to Africa. Here come the negative criticisms. And what I wrote was, your comments are more reflection on you than on me. Okay, so we just have to push through it. It's going to come, and if we wait on the media or anyone else to validate what we are doing, then we have missed the point.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and just for the benefit of urban leaguers, I had a chance to join Vice President Harris on a trip to Ghana in March, and Africa, there are now 1.4 billion people on the African continent. It's equivalent to the population of India and the population of China. The average age is somewhere in the 20s, right? It's a teen, 19?
Younger, teenagers.
Very young population, so you can see what the potential in the economic future is. And you know, I say shame on the media, because they didn't do any homework, no research, no understanding of the economic opportunity. And of course, here in Houston, you've got a large African community, a large African immigrant community, one of the largest in the country. So, you know, shame on the media. Mayor Johnson, and I'll come to you next, Mayor Adams. You had a vigorous, contested Chicago-style election. Y'all were duking it out to the end, and then in the 12th round, you landed one of those Ali lefts, and down went your opponent. But when you come through that, obviously sometimes the die is cast with the media and with certain segments of the community. How do you best think about navigating that as a brand new chief executive?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And so as you talk, and as you know, Mayor Turner and Mayor Bass talked about, you know, the challenges with the media, they got an early start with me, you know, and it goes back to my time as an organizer in the city of Chicago, pushing for liberation, the hopes of those of us who are descendants of slaves. I'm a public school teacher, a middle school teacher. Usually people clap after I say that. Thank you. Thank you. You all know middle school teaching is one of the greatest positions you can ever hold. My father wanted me to become a pastor, but it's a non-union position. So I said my best next thing to get to heaven is to teach middle school. So I know, well done, good and faithful servant. You know, but you know, they came at a brother, you know, all of the different elements that you can imagine, right, to create fear. And coming from a large family, was 10 of us. I'm the middle child. Yes, pray for me. I have issues, like most middle children. We had one bathroom, so you learn how to negotiate early in life. You know, ally with the sisters. But my older brother, who is an ancestor now, is not with us, had an addiction and died unhoused. And, you know, one of the things he would always say to me growing up, that if you're in a fight and you're ducking, you're losing that fight. He says, swing. And so in this moment, since it almost doesn't matter, you know, what I do, they're not gonna like it. You know, these forces that, let's just name who these forces are. Mm-hmm. These forces still do not like the results of the Civil War. Right? I mean, these are individuals who want a rematch. So there's not much you can say to them, right? And so what I'm inspired by, though, is that the election that put me on the 5th floor was a multicultural, intergenerational movement. And 27,000 new voters voted in April that did not vote in February, all of them under the age of 34. I won by 26,532 votes. And so the youth energy is alive, and we're bringing people together. There are folks, that, in the business community, corporate leaders, and the 80-year-old woman who has had my number since before I knew, I was going to be in this position. So we're bringing people together. I'm of the mindset that there's more than enough for everyone. No one should lose at the expense of someone else winning. The city of Chicago has one of the largest economies in the world. No one should be too poor living in one of the richest cities in one of the wealthiest countries at the richest time in the history of the world. There is more than enough for everyone.
Let's give the mayor a hand on that affirmation. Mayor Adams, you're in the most complex, dynamic, hard-hitting, rock-throwing media environment in the world. It is interesting to watch the New York media. And what I've appreciated about you is your willingness to go toe-to-toe. Which is so essential in a city with an aggressive press corps.
Well said, well said. And you have athletes that won't play in New York City because of the media, because our media is hard. And what I think is imperative for black people in general, but specifically for black men, we are so afraid of getting the title that can destroy our lives. If you get the title of angry black man, you will not raise up in corporate society, you will not raise up in Hollywood, you will not raise up on a sports team, you will not raise up on politics. And so, because of our fear of that's an angry black man, we hold it all inside. And that holding that stress inside manifests itself through heart disease, hypertension, all sorts of illnesses is connected to our feeling that I don't want to be classified as an angry black man. Listen, the media must critique us. We're not in this society where we could do whatever we want and not receive the level of critique that comes with the job. But there's a difference between critiquing and doing a proper analysis of what you have done and being intentionally destructive. And so what I always do, I'm not holding in my anger. I'm going to let you know how I feel at the moment. And I'm not going to go through a thesaurus to find the proper terminology to make you feel comfortable and how you make me feel uncomfortable. I'm just going to explain to you what I feel in this moment, and then I'm gonna move on, because I got a city to run. I can't sit there and play with you when I'm dealing with all of these other crises. I'm gonna move on. I'm not gonna just stay there and say, you know what, you made me feel bad. No, I'm gonna let you know how I feel, and then I'm going to go run this city with a $106 billion budget. I'm going to do what needs to be done, because part of the game is to distract you and keep you tied up in a moment. And so they say, well, you know what, you're thin skinned. You get offended quickly. No, you're not gonna disrespect me. I know who I am. I know what I've done.
And Mayor, they didn't say that about Giuliani and Koch.
Yeah.
Right.
And Giuliani and Koch were always
but the standard
in
is
a
not
contentious conversation with the New York media, and so...
And you never hear them call him an angry white man.
And the thing that's so interesting, I think, about this conversation is how for the mayor, distinct from every other elected position, save maybe the presidency, the media is crucial to your success, crucial to your ability to navigate, and you have to think about it, strategize it, and invest in the people and the infrastructure to be able to deal with them. So let's give these mayors a big, big round of applause. Now, let me get to a couple of...
But Mark, I want to, if I can,
because
that's what you said is so important. What you said, and that is a losing model. If you have to depend on someone to sell your product...
You've lost.
Yeah.
Right. So what we must do, and what our young people out there who are good marketers and communication people, this is a great opening. We must do direct-to-consumer communication. That is where we're doing. We must do our own radio shows. We must use these various forms of communicating. We must reach out to the influencers, to the credible messengers. We have to shift the dynamic and no longer be held captive by the media. We must do direct-to-consumer communication to show what we're doing every day. Because if you were to pick up the tabloids, you would think all of us are failing when we have so many successes.
And can I add, in ideas, what I would certainly recommend to every mayor, and especially mayors of color, is that you have to have your own effective communication team. And what I've said to my communication department, I said in every one of my 23 departments, we have public information officers that report up to my communication team. I view every one of those PIOs as a reporter in their department, working for my communication team. And what I've said to my communication team, if this paper or this television can do a better job of telling our story than my communication team, then we are missing the mark. So in every one of my departments, what I've said to my POs, what I've said to my communication team, no one knows our story better than us. We know our story. Do not rely on the newspaper or the television stories to tell our story. They are not going to tell our story. They're not going to make us, when we have been successful in achieving A, B, C, or D, you think they're going to run out there and say the mayor has done A, B, C, and D? What a good mayor he is. Don't expect that to happen. But I do, what I say to them, but I do expect my communication team to tell our story so that it is out there. And I think that's critically important.
Yeah, go ahead, Mayor Bass.
You know, one thing I think we all need to be aware of is coming into election season, the presidential season, they're coming after the four of us. That's right. Because the narrative of the Republicans is going to be there's chaos in every single one of our cities. And what's the subtext of that? Who's running these cities? And so I think we need to be prepared for that. But one thing I just also want to say is that the solidarity between the four of us has just been very strong, and I'm so appreciative.
I applaud it. We applaud it in a huge way. I applaud it because being mayor is a damn hard job. When I left office, I didn't realize how fatigued and worn out I was. I was so tired, I couldn't sleep. I was so clued in that every time a crisis happened and I saw it on TV, I thought I was still responsible for it.
Yes.
It took me several months to reset my mind, body, spirit, and soul, and really had no one to tell me this is what's going to happen when you leave office, because when I left, I was Mayor Turner running to the tape, trying to put lots of things in place, trying to get lots of things rooted so it couldn't be undone. And so it is a quite challenging job. I want to switch gears right now. Big challenge. We're going to get to housing and homelessness and those sorts of issues. But big challenge now for Black America is this dual challenge that on one hand, we have justice issues, community distrust, unacceptable levels in the nation of police misconduct, brutality, and shootings. On the other hand, we're killing each other. We have black on black violence as well. The mayor is in the vortex of every single one of these challenges and has to navigate. So Mayor Adams, let's go to you. How do you think and what's your message and strategy? You have a unique background when it comes to this as a former law enforcement officer, but also someone who has publicly talked about how you were harassed by the police as a young black man. Talk a little bit about how the balancing act, and I want all of you all to answer this question, the balancing act or the conflict between these issues in reality and in perception?
First of all, take the H away from harass, and I got my ass kicked by police. So let's be clear on that. You know, I was arrested, I was beat, went into the police department, started an organization called 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care, fought for civil rights issues within the police department, testified in federal court about the overuse and abuse of stop and frisk. The federal judge mentioned my name in the report when she ruled against the police department. The legacy of my fight against law enforcement is clear. Now, some people want to rewrite the history, but in reality, when other folks were silent on this issue nationally, I was a leading voice in this country about over-abuse policing nationally. What we must do is what Archbishop Desmond Tutu stated. We spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. No one goes upstream and prevent them from falling in the first place. Policing, by the time a child has a gun, we're already lost. The question is what happened to cause that from taking place? When I sit down with gang members and I ask them, how many of you dealing with learning disabilities, it's astonishing. 30 to 40% of the people who are in jail right now are dyslexic. I was on a path of doing the same things. If we don't go upstream, while we deal with the crime downstream, let's be clear, we can't be just upstream because Bebe is creating some havoc right now in our streets. So we have to identify the extreme recidivists, give them the assistance they need, but we have to stop the pushing people in the river. That is what we're doing. That's why we did 100,000 summer youth jobs. That's why we did Summer Rising, so our children could be educated all school year long. Leaning into foster care children, paying for their college tuition, giving them stipends, making sure we do money for child care. So you got to do all those things.
How much of that, to do it at scale, requires the state, the feds, the private sector to do the upstream work at scale? Because you're doing great things on your own, but to do it at scale and on a sustainable basis, is it within the power of the municipal government alone?
No, it's not. But that's where the rubber meets the road. Now, when you match and redefine policing and do something that I think we make the biggest mistake in, Brother Mark, when hospitals and medical institutions weren't doing right, we told black and brown people to become doctors and nurses. When our teachers were not educating our children, we recruited black and brown sorors and frats to go in and become teachers. Why are we afraid to tell young, smart, black and brown people to go into law enforcement? If we want law enforcement to be what we want it to be, why not recruit our talent to go in there and do it? I appointed Keishawn Sue, the first African-American woman ever to be the police commissioner in the city of New York. Now, Eddie Caban is the first Puerto Rican to ever do it. Tanya Casella is the first African-American woman to be the first deputy commissioner. We got the talent. So we know how our policing should be in our community with the balance that we need to be recruiting. I want my fraternities, my sororities, my churches, my boulets, all my groups to say, let's find our brightest and our best and go into this profession and define how we want policing to be, as we did with the overproliferation of guns. And the real challenge we're having, heroin destroyed our communities in the 60s and 70s. Crack cocaine destroyed us in the 80s and 90s. Fentanyl is going to be both those added together. If we don't get a grasp on fentanyl right now, we're going to see a total destruction of our communities like we've never witnessed before.
Thank you, Mayor Adams. Mayor Bass, same question.
Well, you know, following up on what you were saying, I believe that in our communities, we've worked for years and know the strategies to intervene and prevent crime. There's always the rap that black folks are upset if it's a law enforcement involved death, but say nothing when it's black on black, which I reject that notion. That is not true. But unfortunately, the grassroots work that happens in all of our communities is never lifted up, and we need to invest more in that. When we went through the time period of mass incarceration, which is not like it's over, but it's a little bit different now, you know, laws were passed to lock us up for everything under the sun, including what I believe were health, social, and economic issues that should not have required incarceration. Then laws were passed by politicians who wanted to be reelected and wanted to have their mailer that said, I did this to be tough on crime. Then a lot of laws were passed to continue punishing people when they left prison. So you are incarcerated while you're in, and then you continue to be punished when you're out. And that's one of the reasons that contributes to recidivism, because if you can't work, if you can't find a place to live, then what are you going to do? You mentioned recruiting for law enforcement. That's hard for a lot of us to swallow. The reality is, in Los Angeles, for example, we have a whole generation of black officers that are retiring. And pretty soon, there'll be virtually no black officers in the Los Angeles Police Department. Is that what we really want? I think that sometimes Democrats in general are shy when it comes to the issue of crime and kind of go all around it. And when we do that, in my opinion, we concede the issue of crime to the right wing. And I don't think that we should do that. I think we need to hit it head on. If somebody commits a crime, you have to hold them accountable, but we also need to invest significant resources in the prevention of crime. I started an Office of Community Safety so that we could look at unarmed responses, we could look at, because a lot of what we see, especially, and Mark, you and I worked diligently so hard on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And I remember looking after Floyd was killed, I remember looking at 100 officer-involved deaths, shooting and otherwise, and I would say 30 to 40% of them were mental health. It was a mental health crisis because we've shredded the mental health system. We allow people to deteriorate into violence or committing a crime, and then they wind up with police encounters. So we have to address these issues that result in really negative encounters with police while we hold police officers accountable.
And let me just add a few things, and just from my own experiences, because when I became mayor of New Orleans, we were having almost 500 murders a year, almost more than one a day, almost 500 in a year, 400 and something. And not only that, I had an active FBI investigation ongoing into officers who were providing private security for drug traffickers as moonlighters. Well, this is what I inherited, right? A complete and total debacle and a mess. But I knew that the violence issue could not be addressed by law enforcement alone, but that law enforcement was an important component, not one versus the other. And I told the community, it's not one or the other. So we invested heavily in summer youth employment, camps, cultural programs, invested in young people, over-invested in young people. I did something that I'm not sure it would work today. I put a curfew in effect for kids under the age of 18, with exceptions for kids who were working or on their way back and forth to school activities. That program never got challenged in court and was highly popular. The president of the ACLU said to me that, he said, if I challenge your curfew, my wife would divorce me. Because the program was popular with mothers. You know, the idea is, how do you do holistically? We changed our policing philosophy to a community proactive policing, but we also had another issue which remains an issue in America today, and that is low closure rates on murders. There's a low closure rate on murders, meaning less than half the murders in America is a suspect identified. So one thing we learned, Mayor Adams, you understand this, there was no focus on investigatory follow-up. Lack of follow-through when a murder was committed, particularly when the victim was black. And so it required a retooling of this. I had to put myself in school informally to understand the mechanisms of this. And I think mayors uniquely, and we'll get to you, Mayor Turner, and you, Mayor Johnson, because you've talked, mayors uniquely have to figure out the combination of things that you have to do, and then you've got to, if you will, persuade the community to support them when in some cases you have a community that can have one part of the community may think, oh, all you got to do is youth programs. Right. Another part of the community thinks just arrest everybody. Right. And both approaches are damn wrong. Right? They're more about slogans and ideology than effects. So Mayor Turner, then Mayor Johnson, and we're focusing on this because this is the real deal. Justice and safety. We are dying. We are killing each other. And yes, there are too many instances where the police kill us. We cannot be silent and act as though there's nothing we can do. Throw our hands up. I don't know about you all. I got weary going to funerals. To the point where now it's hard for me to go to one, and I'll only go to one if it's a family member or a close friend. It's weary, but that's part of your responsibility. Mayor Turner.
Let me just say that I agree with all that has already been said. Start with the understanding that every person in this city has value and is important. Every single person. I don't care what their social economic status may be, where they live, where they come from, what their language may be, what their sexual orientation may be. Every single person in this city has value. Every neighborhood is important. And every neighborhood should feel safe. In terms of the clearance rate, a few years ago, our clearance rate was 50% or less. But every morning, I look at the numbers, Monday through Friday. I ask the police department, send me the numbers every single morning. And this morning, the clearance rate on homicides is 82% on clearance rate. It is important to have the right people in the right positions. I'm proud of the police chief that we have. Chief Troy Fenner, stand up, man. So stand up, Chief Troy Fenner. I'm proud of him. When we were looking for a police chief, when I needed a police chief, rare do you have community activists who will call you up and say, Mayor, we recommend this guy. And I had the union and police officers calling me up and said, Mayor, we recommend this guy. I said, I got my community activists and I got the police officers saying this guy. And then the ministers started calling. So I said, but someone who grew up in this neighborhood, someone who knows the people in this neighborhood, someone who calls it straight. So leadership, there is no substitute for leadership. Now, when there's a police shooting, mayors have to deal with that. When there's a shooting on one another, mayors have to deal with that. We are on both sides of the equation. And cities have to deal with everything, Mayor Adams, that flows down. So when the state of Texas passed policies that say anybody can have a gun, no permits, no licensing, and guns are everywhere, all of that flows down to cities. And we are the ones, as mayors, that have to deal with those crazy, idiotic policies. If you are making the market attractive for guns and making guns available and accessible, what do you think people are going to do with them when they get them? But it's up to us to deal with it. So what we did is that it does require a holistic strategy, because as a society, we have called on the police, law enforcement, and I think, Mayor Johnson, you made mention of this. We call on police to do everything, and they cannot do everything. And we sometimes direct our resources and investments just in police. So we put together this One Safe Houston strategy, holistic. We are providing the support to police that they need. I want them to go to work, and I want them to go home safely. And so we provide them with the support that they need. We're also investing in technology. We're doing all that. Our reentry program, we have 12,000 to 13,000 people yearly that are coming out of our criminal justice system, state, coming back into Houston, Harris County. So we put together a reentry program because they need jobs and they need housing. And if you don't provide those things for them, they're going to end up on your street. So we got to address them. We have people who are suffering with mental health issues. So we're investing in crisis intervention. Substance abuse, we're investing in that. We need a lot more support from the feds and the state when it comes to mental health, behavioral health, substance abuse, because otherwise cities are having to do it on their own. Domestic violence. We're investing a lot more in domestic violence because a lot of the crimes are happening within the walls where people live. And I don't care how many police officers you have, these crimes are happening inside people's homes, inside people's houses. They're relational, but we're investing to give families, to give women and others an opportunity to be in a safer environment. So we're doing that. On the community aspect, we're working with community activists, getting them engaged, getting them involved, providing resources there. And we are focusing on this young population between 16 and 24. Because that's the group, when I look at the numbers, it's that group that is driving our numbers. And we're finding ways to speak directly to those individuals, 16 to 24. And in large part, they are black and brown. They are males. And so we are doing everything that we can to reach them. And that's why it's so important for our young folk, this young population, to see people like Mayor Eric Adams and Karen Bass and Brandon Johnson and Mark Yu, because our kids cannot be what they cannot see. And that's why I try to continue to say to the media and other folk, if you want a safe city, tell the good stuff. Because if you're constantly feeding into the minds of our kids that they cannot succeed, that they are predators, that they are no good, then you're working against what we are needing to achieve. So it takes all of that and so much more, but it requires a holistic strategy. I would say in all of our cities, homicide rates are down. Despite what people are saying, what they're hearing, the homicide rate is down. Violence in our city is down, okay? But I do recognize we can spit out the numbers, and if people don't feel safe, then they're not safe. I got that. And as long as there's one person being killed or one person being assaulted or one car being broken in, it's one too many. So we are investing in police. This whole story about cities not supporting police, BS. Cities are supporting police. Mayors are supporting police. We want the police to have what they need to solve the crimes. But we also recognize that we have to invest in communities that have been underserved for a long, long time. Lastly, and I'll be through with this, state took over the largest school district in the city of Houston, HISD. They put in place a superintendent and a board of managers of their choosing. The superintendent just announced for these schools, about 29 of them in primarily underserved communities, communities of color, for kids who are disciplinary problems. His plan is we're going to close down the libraries and take that space and set it up for disciplinary centers for those kids. Now, wait a minute. And what I said, now you say not wanting to be the angry black man. You're going to close down the library, reassign the librarians, take the space, and set up disciplinary centers. What do you think you are saying to these kids? What do you think you're saying? So every time these kids in the future go, when you start talking about libraries, what do you think they're going to associate a library with? Disciplinary centers. And you mean to tell me you're going to close down the libraries in these communities, and I can drive a few miles away, and in other communities they have fully functional libraries, and you want a safe city?
Mayor Turner, I saw you on television, I guess yesterday, speaking out on this, and one of the unique elements of being in the South, and this is not something that would likely happen in New York, California, or Illinois because of the legislature. Black mayors in the South have faced for decades usurpation of power, going back to the 1970s and the early 1980s with people like Maynard Jackson, my late father. There were legislative efforts to hijack control of their airports. The driving force was because these airports were making progress in creating opportunities for minority businesses. In Houston, the state legislature has in effect hijacked and done a hostile takeover of the Houston Independent School District. In places like Kansas City and St. Louis, in Jackson, Mississippi, the state legislatures have hijacked in Jackson the judicial system, the law enforcement system. So the usurpation of power directed at black control that comes from voting and democracy. So these are attacks on democracy. So Mayor, we want to be clear that we are with you 100%. Mayor Johnson, safety and justice.
Yeah, so it's something that is top of mind for all of us. And let me just say, to Mayor Bass, thank you for just highlighting the history of the Los Angeles Police Department in particular. I was in high school when Rodney King was beaten. This was not a dig on everyone else on this stage, but I was in high school in the 90s, just saying.
That's okay.
I was right behind you.
We were all in elementary school.
And by the way, since I am Generation X, let me just send a shout out to Generation X, the last obedient generation on the planet. But we grew up in that era, and in the 90s in Chicago, I mean, there were almost 1,000 murders a year. This is not new, to any of us. And so, what everyone has said on this stage, has tremendous merit. It's going to require a layered approach. It's going to require all of us that in order to have better, stronger, safer cities, we have to invest in people. You already know, I know we only have a few more moments here, but my father raised me with the understanding that your heart and treasure have to be aligned. That when you really love people, you invest in them. And, Reverend Al Sharpton, since he brought up the governor of Alabama, and I'm a social studies teacher, I will not be outdone. All right, so if you remember when the Great Society was being pushed, and President Johnson understood through all of our collective work that we have to get at the root causes, that we have to provide support on the front lines, of course, but we have to deal with poverty. And the governor of Alabama, Wallace, said that, President Johnson believes that because someone at 10 years old has committed a crime, that it means they didn't have enough watermelon to eat. I mean, that's what he said. And so when we talk about the press corps, it's not like white supremacy was birthed, you know what I'm saying, during Trump's reign, right? So there's always been this battle or fight against liberation, particularly for black folks, because the power structure understand what works because they want it for their communities, right? And so as we push for this great society, I believe unemployment amongst white men was 30%. Our country called it a national crisis. They said it was too dangerous for America to have that many white men unemployed. And when you come through our cities and you see the struggles and challenges that our people are experiencing, we have stuff to dig, things to build, and lives to save. White men got shovels before there were things to dig. They came with every single government program. No one called it entitlement. No one talked about bootstraps or strings or pulling yourself up. And so having a layered approach where one, we're moving on something called treatment, not trauma. 40% of the 911 calls that come through are mental health crises. You have police officers that are being called to people's homes because their 6-year-old doesn't want to go to preschool and they lock themselves in the room. We're asking too much from law enforcement. And so investing in people, doubling the amount of young people that we hire, I've made a commitment to promoting 200 more detectives to deal with the clearance rate. But the bottom line is we have to have a collective response to what we know works. And if we're not serious about pulling people up out of isolation and poverty, if we're not serious about that, then we're not serious about building better, stronger, safer cities. And so we're all committed to making sure that our treasures and our heart are aligned to do what's right for the people of Chicago and all of our respective
Let's
cities.
give these mayors a big round of applause. I'm about to close in a couple of quick things. So let's talk about minority business, black business, growth, and participation. So let me set the question up. The Biden administration has made these extraordinary commitments Congress has passed to infrastructure. Significant amounts of the money will come to states or airports or water systems, state departments of transportation, and in some instances to local public works departments. And therefore there's this incredible opportunity for there to be inclusiveness. And I know Mayor Adams, because we worked with your team on your efforts at the New York legislature recently to address some of the systemic barriers to participation. How does this fit into your agenda?
So important. As I stated, we have over $106 billion budget, over 302,000 employees. Our procurement for goods and services, it's over $20 billion. And what we found is that the key to proper cities, you have to look at your agencies. How are your agencies spending? And if you don't take control and make sure that they have a real plan of MWBE and ensuring that they are being actively recruiting and identifying pathways of going from being subprimes to primes. We were able to successfully do two things during our legislative session. Hats off to Leader Carl Hastie and Majority Leader Andrew Stewart-Cousins. We were able to, number one, get local hiring. So if we're using governmental dollars to do things, we need to hire locally, because communities should not watch buildings go up and their futures go down. It needs to be connected, and we were able to do that. We were also able to increase the discretionary amount that you can use for discretionary contracts to $1 million. It was $500,000. We were able to increase it to $1 million because of our state lawmakers. But we're also using technology now to see what our agencies are doing. You can't wait to the end of the year and do an analysis of how well you did the previous year. We are monitoring it now in real time. My mother used to say, if you don't inspect what you expect, it's all suspect. We got to inspect it right away and tell that person who is not meeting my expectations, You have to correct your actions and come up with an improvement plan. You have to move bureaucracy out of the way. It is too damn difficult to do business in many of these cities because we create these bureaucratic barriers to really de-incentivize those women and minority-owned businesses from leaning into how to do business with the city. Businesses are important, and we're focusing heavily on that.
Thank you, Mayor Bass.
Well, I certainly agree with that, especially when it comes to the bureaucracy. But one of the things that I found fascinating is that a lot of the bureaucracy is just made up. It's just self-imposed. There's no particular reason for it at all, which is why it's been kind of nice not having worked in the city. So I come in and the stuff just looks crazy to me. But, you know, the other thing is that we have to be aggressive in terms of not just telling somebody the website. We have to bring our businesses in. And for example, I was meeting with a group of people that want to have contracts around homelessness. You know, our community, we create programs, but we don't think about the administration, the finances, the board of directors. So what I'm doing now is looking for some philanthropic dollars to do technical assistance so that our community-based organizations, for-profit and not-for-profit, will be ready to contract with the city. We do billions of dollars of business in procurement, and a lot of it is not just with people from Los Angeles, it's with people out of California. And so I think that it is critical. The number one problem in LA is profound income inequality. The worst manifestation is homelessness. What's the answer for income inequality? Raise people's incomes, whether it's salaries or whether it's business opportunities.
Mayor Turner.
We have a very active Office of Business Opportunity, OBO, and we are very, very laser focused when it comes to MWSBE participation. When I came into office, we had about 2,500 certified firms. As of today, we've doubled that. It's about 5,100 certified firms. I will tell you, we have increased the number of primes, people who were subs, but now have been moved up to prime. Under my administration, we have awarded, in dollars and cents, more money to MWSBEs than in the history of this city. And when you drill down specifically to black businesses, they have received more contracts in dollars and cents than any time in the history of this city. And when it comes to subs, the average participation for MWSBEs is about 29%. 3 categories: construction, professional services, goods and services. Across the board, the average percent is about 29%. When you go, for example, to Hobby Airport, one of the 16 5-star airports in the world, that airport, the concessions, now the MWBE participation is about 80%.
Wow.
When you go to Hobby, make sure you stop by until you drop, because you are benefiting MWSBEs. So it has to be intentional, and I agree. If you don't, then you're hurting even your community, and then you scale up, everybody benefits.
Mayor Johnson.
Yeah, this is the greatest opportunity that I believe that I have in this moment with one of the, again, larger economies in the world. And as has already been articulated, our procurement process is arduous, and you're right, Mayor Bass, this is not policy, it's just kind of a procedural, dynamic that makes it difficult for our people to experience the wealth of the city of Chicago. Now, what I will say is this, that I have a deputy mayor that's dedicated to this particular dynamic, neighborhood and economic development, and so we're going to be very intentional about making sure that the west and south sides of the city of Chicago that have experienced a tremendous amount of disinvestment. I live in Austin on the west side, largest concentration of black folks in one single neighborhood, arguably in the entire country. And schools have been closed, mental health facilities have been shut down. We just had a downpour of rain, so we experienced a great deal of flood. We got smoke coming in from Canada. My wife said, if the locusts come, brother, you better repent. Everything was fine until you became mayor. But there's some real opportunities.
Right, brother?
Right. There are some real opportunities to transform our infrastructure. The last thing that I'll say is this. I don't mean to trigger anyone on this stage, but the DNC is in Chicago. And this is a tremendous opportunity for us as we build up the infrastructure to create these type of investments for our people. I believe there's more than enough for everyone. And so as we make sure that black businesses in the city of Chicago experience the wealth of the city and what the DNC will bring, I'm happy to share some with my other mayors from around the country. So.
Let's give these mayors a big round of applause. Before we wrap, let me offer thanks to Mayor Adams, where we have the New York Urban League led by Arva Rice. It's been a great partner of the New York Urban League. Is Arva in the audience this morning? I don't know if she's here. Any members of the New York Urban League, thank you for that. Certainly Los Angeles, our CEO, Michael Lawson, stand up, Michael, retiring CEO in Los Angeles. Thank you for the partnership. And of course, here in Houston, where Judson Robinson has worked so closely with Mayor Turner and Karen Freeman Wilson and the legendary Chicago Urban League working with Mayor Johnson. So we want to affirm this working relationship that Urban League affiliates have, not only with these four mayors, but we seek all over the country. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Eric Adams, Mayor Karen Bass, Mayor Sylvester Turner, Mayor Brandon Johnson. Give it up.
Thank you for joining us this morning for Plenary 2, State of Black America. Next, please join us for our morning forums. See you tonight at the Whitney M. Young Gala.